to the Stormie Grace YouTube Academy. This is S.J. Anderson. I'll be your teacher for this lecture, for this course, this short course on Uranus and Neptune through the signs of the zodiac. And we're going to look at how to delineate these two planets and some of the techniques that I use and some of the ideas I have about how to go about understanding Uranus and Neptune as they move through signs, as they move through zodiac signs, and some of the implications and applications of this particular part of our astrological tradition. So welcome again. This is S.J. Anderson for Stormie Grace's YouTube Academy, and I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to work with you tonight and today, wherever you are in the world, at whatever time of the day it is where you are. So let's just go ahead and start. What I've done is prepared a PPT, so you'll have this as on the screen. You'll be able to see me in the corner there, and I'll come back and forth with this bigger picture of myself. But there's a lot of information on this PPT, and it's very, very useful. So the first thing I want to say is there's going to be two parts to this talk. The first part will be Uranus and Neptune. What are they? How do we understand them? How do we begin to grapple with their significations and their meaning for our lives and for our charts and for our astrological work? And then the second part is going to be Uranus and Neptune through the signs of the zodiac. So it's kind of two separate issues that I want to cover here. And you can see this lovely graphic that Stormie and her team made for the YouTube Academy. That picture of me, they did a good job there. Congratulations on that. So let's just jump right in. The first thing I want to say, and this is a fundamental point, maybe the most important point that I would ever want to make to any students of mine, would be that planets are the central feature of astrology. Planets are everything. There's no astrology without planets. There's nothing to grab a hold of. Planets are the bedrock, the foundation of our astrology. And I think part of it is that they move. So they're different than everything else in the rotating sky. They're actually moving. And so because of that, they're very special. And it's something that we pay attention to and pay close attention to. I mean, just imagine if you were 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago looking at the night sky, and then these objects were moving and going and not visible when they were retrograde or under the beams of the sun, when the sun got too close to them. And then you saw Mercury in the morning and then at night. So there's this differentiation of the skies that results from moving planets, such that allows for a language, right? A written language to be communicated. We don't have different words without variables within the letters and how the letters are organized to make different words. So you need that difference to then build a vocabulary. We only get that, or it's ensured that we have that with planets that move, because it provides these variables, these ever-changing variables. And like I have here that the planets move, we see them move, and then we can generate a sense of this question: what will happen when this planet is in the same spot again? You begin to notice pattern. You begin to notice symbolic repetition, such that you can say, just like with language, if someone uses the same noun in a language you're learning, you can begin to get used to what that noun means, what object that word is pointing to in the reality. And it's like a clock, we want to know what time it is. I can look at my watch. I can say, well, at noon, there's certain things, whenever the hands of my watch reach a certain point on the dial of the watch, on the face, I know it'll be sunny out and it'll be warm. So it's this kind of predictive feature of the planets as the hands on the clock that are essential to the idea that astrology offers us, which is that the movement of the heavens impacts and affects the affairs of us on Earth. So that's a huge opening salvo for this lecture and for this small lesson. And the other thing I just want to say here, that sign-based astrology, you might call it signology, I've heard it referred to as that before, but it's the heavy focus on the signs of the zodiac as maybe leading with the significations of the signs. It's something that developed in modern astrological practice. Some historians say that it comes with Alan Leo and people around his time at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century and early 19th century. Sorry, the turn of the 19th to the 20th century and early 20th century, when astrologers were trying to mass produce astrology so that it could be taken in by a large number of people. And the way they decided to do it was to divide every being up into 12 signs, right? You are an Aquarius, I'm an Aries, right? You become your zodiac sign, but it's the sign that the sun is in when you were born. And so this idea that you are a sign becomes popular in the early 20th century, and it allows for astrology to be delivered all over the world through sun sign astrology. But it loses sight of the planets, because the planets are the root of why a sign has a signification. It comes from the ancient division of the signs and the ancient assignation of the signs to a planet. And that is when and how a sign takes meaning, because it has a ruler, a domicile ruler. And we use things like the Thema Mundi in the most ancient texts, the birth chart of the universe, the hypothetical chart, to assign the signs a ruling planet, and then that is how the sign gets a majority of its meaning, or a large portion of its meaning. So I've got a couple of examples here. The moon. When we look at the moon and we observe the moon, just from observing it, we can draw conclusions about what it means. The moon moves very fast. It gets big, then small. The left half, then the right half is visible. Sometimes it blocks out the sun, but it's changing quite fast. And so we think about changeability, and that's why the idea of home as well, because it's so reliable. At nighttime is when you see it most prominently, and usually at night we're in our home and we've retired. So there's this sense of home and of changeability that you find in the ancient text to signify the moon, but then that also gets assigned to Cancer. You think about Cancer and you think about home. You think about the mother and the home. So you can see here it flows from observing the moon. That's how Cancer gets its significations. Another example, the sun. It's central to all life when we're just observing it. It's this massive yellow disk, bigger than anything else. It's very warm and hot. It feels good. I've been walking around where I live recently and just getting out into that sun, especially after a cold winter. It's constant. It's continuously moving at the same pace, basically, through the same portion of the sky, the ecliptic. Vettius Valens, the ancient Roman astrologer, calls it the organ of mental perception. And so there's this sense of the perceiving part of who we are. But then that flows into Leo. Those of you out there that are more familiar with sinological practice, Leo is the self. Sometimes you see that lion or the person that wants to be the center of attention. That's what a lot of astrologers will say, Leo is kind of ego-centered and craving attention. Well, I think it comes from the sun, right? The sun is undeniable as it moves through the sky. We give it our attention, we cover ourselves from it, and we bathe in it, and we enjoy it. Again, what we observe of the sun flows into the significations of Leo, because that's the sign the sun rules. And we could do this for all 7 traditional planets. I'm not going to, but you get the main point is that the planets are central to the meaning of even the signs of the zodiac. And they're also central to aspects. They're central to houses, maybe less so, but certainly aspects and zodiac signs come from the significations of the planets. So they're this essential core. Okay, so next I want to talk about other ways to learn the significations of the planets. There's 3 main ways, in my view. One is text. We go to astrology books, we see what other astrologers have written about the planets, what they mean. The second is observation, and this is where we can observe how the planets may affect us. And here I mean in terms of their astrological features. So if we say the sun is at this degree of Aquarius every year, this happens to me every year. This particular style of event, we can study the movements of the planets and try to derive from that observation what they may be doing to us, or what messages they may send to us about what's going to happen in this realm, depending on your theory of astrology. Not the topic of this talk, but a very fascinating aspect of our practice is, are the planets sending, vibrations to cause things? Are they gods writing a message to us? So there's debates on that. But so you can observe. And then the third is an inspiration, intuition, or divine transmission. I really like this one. The idea that maybe when we pray or do kind of a spirit quest or psychedelics, that we may get messages about what planets mean. We're going to focus on the first two in this talk because the third is a bit out there and it's hard to grasp. It's more like, someone coming down from the mountain with a message, and can you trust it? It's more personal. But text and observation are the two we'll focus on here. And, the other thing is with the 7 traditional planets, we have a large body of literature. It goes back thousands of years. And there's a certain confidence through years of testing those significations. I mean, our Hellenistic texts start in, 2,000 years ago, right around the turn of the millennia, the Common Era. We have many, many texts, and we don't even know how far back those go, right? They could be codifying a tradition that goes back thousands of years. Those early writers do talk about getting inspiration from certain priests or gods like Hermes, but still we just don't know. But there's still thousands of years of testing, and then medieval astrology and all kinds of astrologers working for thousands of years with this basis of what the 7 traditional planets mean. But with the modern planets, Uranus and Neptune, we only have hundreds of years because they weren't discovered. So we're not as sure. It's exciting in a way, but we can still play a role in this living, unfolding body of knowledge, this sort of living tradition. And we're still working with it. So every working astrologer, you, I, people out there listening, you have decades and centuries and millennia really in front of you and in front of us of really figuring out what Uranus and Neptune are and deriving a system or integrating them into the systems that we already have. Okay, so let me see here. Let me come back to that next slide, excuse me, on that. The other thing about the traditional planets is that they're visible. And Uranus and Neptune certainly aren't visible. Uranus can sometimes be seen hazily. And under very special conditions, there's a glimmer of it, but it wasn't visible enough, often enough, to be known as a planet until it was observed by telescope in the 18th century. But the thing about the 7 traditional planets is much of our culture is derived from them. They're fundamental in everything. In our language, we have nouns and adjectives derived from the planets. The Saturnine, Jupiterian, jovial, venereal. But the days of the week, I think, is the best example of just how fundamental the planets are. And here's a drawing. You can see you just place them in what we call Chaldean order, and then you can draw lines and connect them in such a way that you have, so Sunday is Sunday, Moon Day, Tuesday is Mars Day, Wednesday is Mercury Day, Thursday is Jupiter Day, Friday is Venus Day, Saturday is Saturn Day, and then back to Sunday. And so, even the calendar is using these 7 traditional planets. That's how embedded they are. And I say that because these outer planets I'm going to talk about are just so different. In terms of our astrology, they're treated much differently. And here you go. Modern outer planets are Uranus and Neptune. Those are planets that the astronomers recognize as planets. They're big enough to be recognized as planets. Then we have dwarf planets, which is a separate category. That's Pluto, Eris, Haumea, Makemake, and Ceres. And those have an astronomical feature that's different than a planet. They're smaller. And if astronomy means anything to astrologers, and it does, and it should, then this is the logical division. We have these 2 major outer planets, and then the dwarf planets. And that's why this talk, I liked so much when Stormie asked me to focus on the outer planets, not on any of the dwarf planets, because they're a separate category. They really are a separate category. And they're in their own category as astronomical, non-visible, proper planets. So just want to make that distinction. It's good to work with them together in that sense. All right, so first let's talk about Uranus. This is, it's something that just observing this image from NASA, this comes from a telescope, and NASA, that's the thing, telescopes are an extension of our eyes. So I do think there's an argument to be made for the telescopic photographic evidence as being an extension of the visibility. We just use a piece of technology and a tool to extend our eyesight. But they're out there in the sky. It's not like we're inventing them. We actually can use a tool to see them. And this is what you see when you look through the telescope. Look at this, it's on its side. That's the first thing I notice, which is strange and different. It's tilted, that's odd. It has these different hues of blue. And then there's this ring, these rings. And so remember I said earlier, from observing the sun, from observing the moon, we can start to understand their significations that then flow into the zodiac signs. Well, here we might just say on the outset, strange. This tilt gives Uranus this strange feature. Maybe that's going to help us understand its significations. The other thing I like to do, now we're here on the text side of things, this is the seminal work on the outer planets. This is the most important work. Richard Tarnas, the eminent scholar, the excellent teacher of astrology, and this he's a scholar, and I've seen him lecture at UAC 2018 Chicago. One of the joys of my astrological life was to see him and some others at that conference. But this book is the main book that I go to for the significations of the outer planets, and even the traditional planets. He has lists of significations in here that are quite excellent. But this is what he says about Uranus. He says that is associated with change, rebellion, freedom, liberation, reform, revolution, the unexpected breakup of structures with sudden surprises, revelations and awakenings, lightning-like flashes of insight. So again, this kind of change and rebellion, reform, unexpected. We're talking about that strange tilt of the planet that we can see in the pictures here. And he says in the book that it's empirically associated. So he's claiming that second prong of observation, through observation, has led him to develop this list of significations. Now we have a text from that observation that we can then use and plug that into our own observations, and it becomes this kind of loop where we develop through time significations of the planets. It's how astrologers work together across centuries, and you're part of that tradition, I'm part of that tradition, if you want to be, And then the next astrologer I want to use is this woman, Isabelle M Hickey. She was a big time astrologer in the 20th century, taught a bunch of astrologers, very influential in the 70s. This book came out, I think, originally around in the 70s, early 70s. She was towards the end of her career. Astrology, a Cosmic Science. And by the way, this is a text, if you're looking for a cookbook of planets and signs, this does have that. I don't know if this was the intention of the talk here, was for me to do a cookbook style. I just am not going to do that here, but if you're looking for that, you can find it in this book. But here's what Miss Hickey says about Uranus: unexpected, sudden, and unpredictable changes, rebelliousness, and electricity. So again, we have this commonality in texts, and that's another way I like to look at texts. I like to read a few different texts and then try to pull together the essential nature that astrologers can agree on. But I'm thinking here, unpredictable, unexpected, rebellious seem to be common elements. She's got originality and genius here too. So again, we can start developing what Uranus signifies through this text and through this observation. And then this other component of observation, this is some of my own observation. Some of the stuff I like to do is you just can look at the history books. When was the planet discovered? And this is a common approach. I didn't invent this. And what was happening at the time it was discovered, because it would just logically flow. When the planet is coming into the collective consciousness, there would be ripples at that time to kind of tell us, usher in its arrival, to kind of make its arrival known. And so Uranus is discovered by William Herschel on 13 March 1781. Right away, you can point out that its discovery on its face, on its own, without looking at anything else, upended our concept of the cosmos, our understanding of the cosmos up until that time, completely changed. Because people thought there's only 7 planets. Now we have an 8th planet, and eighth astrological planet, but so if you count Earth, that would be a seven astronomical planet. Astronomers don't consider the sun or the moon planets. It's a satellite, the moon, and the sun is a star. So either way, we totally understand our solar system anew, and there's a huge breakthrough in terms of the telescopic technology, that there's even greater layers outside of what we had thought we were encased in. So again, this is change, upheaval, discovery, like the significations we saw in the texts. Revolution, it's an upheaval of the scientific understanding, of the astronomical understanding. The other thing I want to point out, 1781 is the middle of the Industrial Revolution, early in the Industrial Revolution, and then the Revolutionary War. If you just type that year into Wikipedia, you see battles after battles in the Revolutionary War. So there's this revolutionary spirit in the world, at least in much of the Western world, which I think encapsulates, we can say, by observing Uranus when it's discovered, we become aware of it. The world that Uranus entered into, it would take on the features maybe of its traits, of its characteristics. So it's interesting here. Now let's go to Neptune. What can we see from the NASA image here with Neptune? Deep blue, it's a nearly uniform blue. What does that remind you of? To me, it's the ocean. I think of this, it's very oceanic here. And so we can start thinking about what, the ocean is vast, it's unknown, you can die in the ocean, you can get lost in the ocean, you have to be very careful if you're navigating the ocean. So Neptune has a kind of serious and mysterious component, as does the ocean, right off the bat. That's what I get from this image. And by the way, I just did this to prepare for this talk. I was really asking myself, what do I see? I've never done this exercise before, so it was really fun for me to do it here. And NASA's got some great images on their website. They've got really high-powered telescopes, so they get these images. So let's go to Tarnus. What does he say about Neptune? Transcendent, spiritual, ideal, symbolic, imaginative dimensions of life, subtle, formless, intangible, and invisible, unitive, timeless, immaterial, infinite. So now we're starting to sound like the ocean, right? This kind of immaterial, infinite, timeless, formless, intangible, imagination. Sometimes you just, floating, and the imagination is vast, sort of like an ocean. So, this is where we can start building through that observation now with the text. What does Hickey say? She goes through here and says obligation, sensitivity, water makes up much of the body. There's a sensitivity when we start talking about water, psychic and mystical. Tarnus was talking about that too, cosmic consciousness. Water connects everything. We're all connected by our watery makeup. This idea of dreams, illusion, disillusion. I think water, when you submerge things in water, it can destroy their form. Water can wreck things, I think that's the disillusion that can come with water. It also is a reflective thing. You look down at the pool, Narcissus, and sees his reflection. And there then becomes this kind of questioning, right? You see yourself for the first time, and it sort of shatters your sense of what reality is. So there's this kind of feature, the mirror-like quality of the ocean. And I think Neptune, with this illusion and disillusion theme that we find in these texts, really can, to me, that's a strong theme with Neptune. All right, so observation, what was going on when the planet was discovered? Discovered by Johann Gottfried Galle, 23 September 1846. So we're, some years later, we're in the next century after Uranus is discovered. But 3 days before its discovery, I found this very interesting. This apparition appeared in France, Our Lady of La Salette. And I don't know too much about it, but just to say, this idea of religion, this idea of kind of unreal or unreality, transcendence, seeing the divine, changing the worldview, sort of a shock to the ego. Again, we see this theme happening right around that time. The other thing is that the spiritualist movement, or spiritualism, a lot of people consider that to have been founded in 1848 in upstate New York, so 2 years after the discovery of Neptune. And other astrologers have made this point, but the idea of spiritualism, transcendence, the kind of interconnection of all things, the great oneness, that that was being described here. The next thing I want to point out is that the invention of the photograph happened actually during these years. Very important. It happened actually a little bit earlier in the 1820s, 1830s, but it was accelerating and sort of codifying and coming into its own right around the time of the discovery of Neptune. And think about the photograph. Think about how essential it is in the years that followed in terms of defining what is real, showing populations images of other people that they had never seen. The photograph is essential in building up celebrity. It's essential in propaganda, right? You can form reality and truth by depicting things in a photograph. Mass media, right? The photograph is the bedrock and the working blocks of television, which is, as that comes into its full power in the 20th century, controls the mind of the masses and forms the minds of the masses. The television is the great illusion. You see things on TV, but they're not real. They're presented a certain way, and we take them in as a certain way, but it's not real. So I think this illusion quality is forming here with the photograph and its development right around the time of Neptune's discovery. All right, let's keep going. So, as I was saying earlier, I would encourage you to do your own observations, to explore these significations in your own life. Text, you read the text, you can do observation, and then write your own text, flow it back into additional texts. It's a circle. You get to complete that circle and push the tradition forward by doing your own writing on astrology or publishing or Twitter or whatever we do in the 21st century, sharing thoughts and ideas so that we can collectively move this process forward and come to a sort of collective understanding, a greater understanding of these outer modern planets that are so fresh, relatively speaking, in our astrological mind. So that is the first part of the talk. What are Uranus and Neptune? What do they signify? I think we have a decent sense of some keywords to understand what they may mean and then how to apply them. Let's go to the second part of the talk. And this is going to be through the signs. So Uranus and Neptune, as they move through the signs, what does it mean? How do we use them as astrologers? Here you can see a nice depiction of the zodiac. Planets move into zodiacal order. They slowly move in zodiacal order through every sign. And, all right, so the first thing I want to say here is that each sign has a ruling planet. Again, I go back to this idea of the planets being essential and a fundamental feature of this whole system, of our whole body of astrological work. And it's key here for how we'll understand a planet in a sign. You cannot understand what a planet is doing in a sign or how it's functioning in a sign without knowing what its planetary ruler or rulers are and what those rulers are doing, how those rulers are functioning in a chart, and what those rulers signify themselves. And so that's the key point here. Even with this second part of the talk, the first part is the planets themselves. The second part is what they mean in a sign, and again that brings us back to planets. So let's keep pushing through here. Other factors that go into the significations of the signs as well include the modality. So is the sign a cardinal, fixed, or mutable sign? The sect, is it of the day or night sect? And the element of the sign, water, earth, fire, and air. That would be a whole nother talk. I really don't want to do too much of this style of application for purposes of this lecture, because it's, we only have so much time for this lecture. And, just think about, we pick Leo. Leo's a fixed sign. That means it's staying in its element. So it's fixed fire. I think that's why you get the ego signification I was mentioning earlier. People are kind of locked into their egos and fixed. It's of the day sect, so you're out there in the day showing off. You want to be out in the world, maybe extroverted. And then it's a fire element, so it's very much a passion. There's the idea of attention and passion and projection of light. And you can see how we're now forming Leo significations outside of the sun and what we observe from the sun. We now can go into these other features of the sign Leo to build our Leo story as well. But I'm not going to do too much of that here. I just wanted to mention it in this slide. Not going to cover that much more in this talk. What I do want to cover is the main ancient source that I use to understand the basis of rulership and how planets function within a sign. And this is Firmicus Maternus's guest host model of rulership. It's to me maybe the most important part of chart delineation, certainly for my practice. And Maternus likens the signs of the zodiac to homes. And he considers that a sign's ruling planet to be the host or owner of that home, such that when other planets come through, that ruling planet is responsible for everything about how the transiting planet, the guest planet, will function. And they filter through their owner. Planets filter through their owner. Think about how accurate that analogy is in your own life. I mean, I'm sure you've been to like a friend's house growing up. I remember I used to go to my real wealthy friends' houses, and they had always had snacks and, you know, all the nicest things. And, you know, my life when I was there took on the character of their resources. You know, I had to go back to my home, and by no means was I impoverished, but I mean, it was like, okay, dang, I'm only playing with this toy and this game, this older game. These families had the, you know, so there's a sense that when you are a guest somewhere, you filter through the energy of the host, the key feature of this whole framework for how we understand a planet and a sign. And here's Maternus. This is from the Brahm translation, page 52, from his book, The Mathesios. He says here, if the ruler of the sign is well located, the planet about which we are acquiring also shares in part of the good fortune of the host's joy. So again, it's this idea of a filtration or a heavy influence between planets. And let's see here. So, and I just want to say here that, and this isn't in this slide, I think it comes up later, but I'm going to stop and say it here. Combination or combinations of planets is to me, I'll let you in on a secret. And to me, without this little secret, my astrology sort of falls apart in a way. And if you learn this secret, you can sort of shortcut. And I don't know if shortcut's the bad word. You can sort of get to the core of astrology, as I view it. And that is combinations of planetary significations. If you can master those and get used to playing with those and going deep with those, you'll be able to, on the fly, at any time, have something interesting to say about any question that comes up in astrology. So for example, someone comes to you like this talk. Stormie says, hey, SJ, will you talk about Uranus and Neptune through the signs? I say, yeah, I can do that, because I have this core method that I use, which is combining planetary significations. And it's, so for example, when we'll talk later, when I want to talk about Neptune and Pisces, like we have currently, I think about Neptune and Jupiter combining. And it gives me a whole rich body of conversation, because it's pretty infinite. I mean, each planet has, 10 or 20 keywords. And as you combine those, there's almost too many combinations. There's no way to lose sight of what may or may not be happening. It's a foundation and a kind of lens through which to engage a chart. So here's the slide. Planets can be delineated in these major ways: the sign they're in, and then you have an analysis of the ruler. That's what I was just saying. You find the sign, you find the ruling planet, and then you explore combinations. Okay, the house they're in, and this to me is more essential. It's not the topic of this talk, but Neptune and Uranus in the houses to me is a much more interesting talk in a way, because it varies in every chart. Whereas Neptune and Uranus in the signs is common for years and years in a row for everybody born within a certain wide year range. So that's the houses they're in. The aspects they make, again, very essential. If you have Uranus on the ascendant, that's going to tell you something fundamental about a chart. If you have Uranus conjunct Mercury, that will give you a lot of information. So I think it certainly varies way more than Uranus and Neptune in the signs. And so it can be more unique and interesting. And then the phase with respect to the sun. So if they're retrograde, direct, or if they're under the beams of the sun. This can also be how we might delineate a planet. These are some of the major ways. This talk focuses on the sign they're in as an introduction. But just know those other 3 points to me are maybe more important. And if I was giving a talk on how to delineate Uranus and Neptune, I would delve in. It would probably be 4 or 5 hours, multiple lectures, and it would delve into these remaining topics: the house they're in, the aspects they make, and then their phase with respect to the sun. So those would be for other talks, not the subject of this talk. All right, let's keep going. So next we have Uranus and Neptune in the signs. Like I was just saying, maybe the least potent way to delineate them, because these planets don't change signs often, they're generational placements. That's the thing I want to say here. We're talking about themes for generations and describing whole large groups of people when we talk about Uranus and Neptune in the zodiac signs. And that's what I'm going to do here in this talk. I'm going to show you how that works with some examples. The other thing is that the condition of the rulers become even more important then. So if you have Neptune in Pisces like we have now, but Jupiter in Capricorn like we just went through, that's a Neptune that may have to deal with the expansive nature of Jupiter, the disillusionment, maybe growing very large, but then having to suffer greatly in a way because Jupiter will have to be austere and stripped away of its power in Capricorn. And so maybe it's even more disillusionment about the lack. Maybe there's a fixation on, not having a lot, and a kind of, drugged out escapism around the pain of that Jupiter that Neptune would bring in Pisces when Jupiter's in Capricorn. So it's a whole nother layer here of analyzing where the ruler of the sign is and its condition in the chart. I'm not going to do much of that in this lecture because it's kind of an advanced technique, an essential but advanced technique. But this is when we can start distinguishing nativities. When you have 5 nativities with Neptune and Pisces, how are they different? Well, you just look at where Jupiter is, because Jupiter rules Pisces. Or let's say Neptune and Gemini, Mercury moves much faster. You're going to have a whole different set of significations with 5 nativities with Neptune and Gemini, because Mercury is so varied. Okay. And then the other thing, like I said, houses are, to me, where we get most of the key information about a life. And it's a key technique for natal delineation. Without the houses, there's not as much that can be said. You're really heavily restricted. Again, it's outside of the scope of this talk. I'd love to do a Neptune and Uranus in the houses talk at some point, but that's not today. Okay, so let's go here. Neptune changes signs about every 14 years. It's like a clock. That's what I love about Neptune. And I think it's a way better marker for generations than Pluto, because Neptune is uniform. It moves through every 14 years. Pluto is like 30 years or more through some signs, and then like only 14 or 15 years through other signs. And a lot of astrologers are so focused on what's your Pluto generation. I never got that because, like I said, Pluto doesn't divide things up evenly. And this is where we start maybe thinking about that dwarf planet feature of Pluto, because a lot of the dwarfs have strange orbits. And this might be a feature of the dwarf planets as a category. But Neptune's perfect. It's every 14 years like a clock. Uranus changes signs every 7 to 8 years. It is also pretty uniform, but it's a little quick to divide up generations. So just by the way, as a point of interest, 25 and 26, 2025 and 2026 are going to be big. Both Neptune and Uranus shift signs during those years. Neptune comes into Aries and Uranus will shift into Gemini. So I think we'll have some big collective energetic changes mid-decade. Pluto also changes signs. Saturn will change signs in 2023 and then 2026. So get ready. We're dealing with this big crisis the first part of this decade, but by mid-decade, something will really transform us. And astrologer Andre Barbeau says we're entering in this great interconnected planetary civilization starting about mid-decade, and we have some of the best astrology at the end of this 2020s period that we're in. So get looking forward to that. All that we've suffered We have something to live for from the astrologers, what the astrologers are saying, the great astrologers, and what the planets are showing in terms of a shift that's coming. All right. But the main point of this slide is that these are generational markers, and it's the years that these planets take to move through signs. I love Neptune as a generational marker. So let's go here. Let's start analyzing this is an example of how you might use Uranus in the signs as a generational marker. Uranus was in Cancer 1948 through 1956, roughly. And so now what we would do, we would combine the significations of Uranus with those of the moon, because the moon rules Cancer. And so you blend those significations to understand what might be themes of this generation. The moon is the body, the mother, and the home. And Uranus is, unexpected changes, revolution, alteration, insight, individualism. You shift those together, you might have changes in the nature of the home, with motherhood, with the body. And I just did this on the fly, because this is how I like to work sometimes. I didn't even know I just picked a generation here and then went quickly to Wikipedia, or what came to my mind right away was people born with Uranus and Cancer. They were coming of age in the 60s, right? The sexual revolution. What was key to the sexual revolution? The pill. FDA approved the pill in 1960 on May 9th. And so this generation of Uranus and Cancer grew up with the pill changing the nature of motherhood and home life, and it delayed, motherhood for people if they wanted. It was freedom and individualism, which is a signification of Uranus for mothers, and it empowered people to sort of control when that part of their life would be taken on. Huge change in the nature of the family structure. As a result, you had divorces. This, I think, started the trend where you had maybe the nuclear family, which was prominent in the 50s. It began to break down into this kind of postmodern era that we're in now, that is very individualistic. And I'm not trying to make a value judgment one way or the other. It's just different. It is what it is, right? There's great benefits to it, and there's maybe some things that are, like with any change, you lose something, you gain something. But that was, I think, so true about this Uranus and Cancer generation. You see how it was a generational marker. That whole generation had access to that shift and change. All right. And so now, if we take, for an example, Neptune as a generational marker, you have Neptune in Sagittarius, 1970 through 1984. This is my Neptune generation. And I have here, you would combine Neptune with Jupiter. So now we're in Neptune and Pisces. I did a little bit of that earlier, but we'll just do it with Neptune and Sag. Jupiter, and in Sagittarius in particular, hopes, abundance, truth, justice, religiosity. And Neptune could be these illusions or delusions. And you think about this generation. These are some of the late Gen X and some of the early millennials. Here's an article I found. Millennials are the most disillusioned generation in living memory, a global study, and it talks about them basically experiencing a society that didn't live up to the ideals they were taught in school, things like democracy, freedom, egalitarianism. The society gave them the shaft in terms of the economic conditions, in terms of the job prospects, and so they're quite disillusioned and about the democratic process. The oligarchy that we seem to live in is exposed for this generation. I think a lot of the false hopes came undone, and so and the internet's probably a part of that. Truth can disseminate online widely. You think about the ocean, right, that we looked at earlier with Neptune. The internet's kind of an ocean, a digital ocean. You can go from idea to idea set, and it exposes. It's a great exposer of lies, and then therefore you're in this sort of disillusionment. You've heard this idea of being black-pilled or red-pilled. Well, the black pill is like you basically nihilistic, sort of, you see the blackness of all reality, right? It's that great abyss that Nietzsche talked about. Staring into the abyss stares back at you. This is kind of very a Neptunian thing. And so this whole generation, this kind of disillusionment is applied to these Jupiterian hopes and dreams. And this is, again, those planetary combinations applied at a generational level. So these are just two examples of how I mainly work with Neptune and Uranus through the signs as a technique of generational understanding and analysis. And that's first and foremost how I approach them and use them. But there's, in the context of the nativity, I'm going to show you how I would do that too. I'm going to look at a few of my favorite nativities, see how this analysis can work in those contexts. And remember, the key here is this combinations of planetary energies. And the reason why I love that as a foundational method as well is that it's very open. There's no right answer. You know, you ask two astrologers, combine Mercury and Jupiter, you're going to get two different creative answers that are unique to that astrologer's mentality and viewpoint. And so it's very much a creative task and a creative invitation. All right, first nativity I want to look at, Marilyn Monroe. This is a AA rated chart, even though the time is 9:30 a.m., so it's probably rounded. We still have the ascendant is probably pretty good because it's right in the middle of Leo. Let's just look at the two planets in question and the signs that they're in. So first she has Uranus and Pisces there, and I'm gonna save discussion of the house and the aspects. I'm gonna set all that aside. I really want to focus on the planets and the signs because that's what this talk is about. But remember, Jupiter is the ruling planet of Pisces, and so we have this combination. Jupiter influenced surprise, Uranus being surprise. I would say wealthy people is Jupiter, so upheavals, surprises, shocks related to wealthy people. And she certainly had her ups and downs and surprises with wealthy people. She seemed to be involved with powerful people. That's what I would say Jupiter is. The Kennedys, she was involved in Hollywood with powerful producers. She, married Arthur Miller, Joe DiMaggio, some of the most Jupiterian individuals in the society she was wrapped up in. And I think if you look at her life, there were certainly turns and divorces and kind of strange Uranian turns of events with respect to this kind of Jupiterian theme. So that's what I would just say. You can look at it in a nativity. Now, if we wanted to say, well, there it is with Mars, well, that she was killed. Or let me just put it this way. I don't know. She died from a drug overdose is the official story. There's other kind of theories, but that might be where some of the Mars and Uranus comes in, a surprise death. Mars can be violence or surprise violence. It's in the 8th house. If we want to start doing that, that's other people's resources. And she certainly was involved in filmmaking, which is producers and with these wealthy people again. That's the resources of a husband. I know she was involved with some wealthy, powerful men who she was married to. So there you go. This might be where we would explore that. If we look at Neptune in her chart, it's in Leo. And that's, again, illusions about self or delusions about self. So that's Neptune. Self and image would be the sun. That's what I would start combining, Neptune and the sun, and exploring those combinations again. Projections about selfhood. I remember I was talking about Narcissus earlier, and you can see that reflection. She's a star, right? But there is something to be said about the mass media, going back again to photography, and this illusory and this kind of lie of the star, right? There's two people. There's the projection and the media creation, and then there's the actual self. We're never going to know the self as the mass audience. We just see the projection. Bob Dylan has this great line High Water is the song on his album Love and Theft. He talks about you'll never be greater than yourself. He's talking to himself, that there's the Dylan that is famous, and then there's him. And I think we see that here with this Neptune and Leo in Marilyn's chart. Now if we go to it's just quite near the ascendant, about 11 degrees, and it's in the 1st house. So it underscores this notion of selfhood, because that's a 1st house signification. So there you go. This is how I begin working with it in a nativity, though this is not my favorite way to work with natal delineation. I really don't work with Uranus and Neptune very often there. Clients will ask me about it, and I will speak about it, but it's not my go-to. But I wanted to just use these examples to give you a sense of how I work with them, and just to show you something that's not generational analysis, how I would use it in the context of natal work. And then let's see here. So now we have Frida Kahlo, another one of my favorite charts. AA time, again rounded, 8:30 a.m., but the ascendant I think is close enough. And I've worked with this chart enough, I feel like it's quite accurate. Uranus and Capricorn, so again, Uranus, Saturn, combining the energy. Saturn rules Capricorn. She was left bedridden after an accident, and she was confined, that's Saturn. And during that confinement, much of her genius came through. She couldn't do anything except do art. And so this kind of Uranian leap forward that great artists often have, they're innovative. That's what makes great art. For her, it was essentially, her confinement was essential to the breakthrough she had artistically, which might be Aquarius, which might be Uranus. So you've got Uranus and Saturn again combined. And if we look at the house topics, again, it's the 6th house of accidents. That accident she had, the one that really messed her up when she was, I think, 18, was a crazy accident. It was on a bus. And like, she was really hurt in this bus accident. But a bus accident is itself Uranian because it's unexpected. Most bus rides, 99.9% of them are normal. But look at Uranus right next to Mars. So we start talking about the aspects, and then the 6th house of injuries with Mars. You can start building a Uranian story about how her life unfolded with respect to this placement. Now, Neptune in Cancer, if you look at her Neptune, so again, moon, home, mother, family, and she moved often, she was divorced. I think when you read about her life, the traditional family structures were not existent. She wasn't able to have children because of her accident. So again, you're dealing with a non-traditional sort of, what do you do if you don't have access to tradition? You're sort of left in a Neptunian sea of the unknown. And she had a very non-traditional life, different lovers, many lovers. She used drugs. She was sort of using drugs as a safety valve. She was in a lot of pain often and many surgeries. And so I think the drugs here are part of how she coped with her relationships. And of course, in addiction, it sort of takes over one's ability to have relationships or have families. And, you know, again, if we start moving in now to the aspects, her Neptune's right on her sun. That's the selfhood. So she was very much in this state of confusion. And you read her story, she descended into addiction later in life, died because of basically drug abuse and the injuries. And it's all 12th house stuff. So you're dealing with now 12th house struggles, a consciousness diluted by Neptune, and then placed in the 12th house of struggles. The one thing I'll say positively here, you've got an exalted Jupiter co-present with that Neptune in the sun, is that she became a great artist of Neptunian kind of transcendence and that strange, diffuse world of Neptune. You look at her art, it's very trippy. I think Neptune is a very trippy planet. It's this kind of sea of the unknown and the transcendent unknown. So I think about psychedelics here. Her art's very, very psychedelic. And it was about her suffering. So again, Neptune in the 12th. But that's a different exploration. If I were to go there, just this is where I would apply the house signification of Neptune and the aspects with respect to Frida's chart. So, okay. So let's move here. I'm going to close with this slide. And just a kind of a conclusion here. Uranus and Neptune in the signs, you know, it's one way to delineate them, the sign placement. That's one way, one beginning way to start understanding them. And I think it's best for generational analysis because of how uniform Neptune in particular moves through the signs every 14 years. That's about a generation. And if you're using them in natal, houses and aspects, I think, are the preferred approach rather than signs. And if you're going to use a planet in a sign, you really need to examine the ruler and where the ruler is and the condition of the ruler to start building combinations of the house placement of Neptune or Uranus, the house placement of the ruler, and the significations then combining. And we didn't do as much of that in this talk, but this is just an introduction. I think for further study, I would encourage you to study the houses and then study Neptune and Uranus in the houses as a kind of leading with that technique. Like if we just go back up, we did it a little bit here, Frida's chart, but you can say here, where's her Venus? She's a painter. So in the 11th, Venus in the 11th, I love that about her chart. That's art and then patronage, because the 11th house is the house of patrons, the house of gifts and abundance from other people and group association. She had a wide network of artistic friends and patrons. Again, that's Venus, which is painting, It's and in the 11th. That's my favorite way to do natal delineation. And then we can look at the ruler. So the ruler of the 11th house here is Mercury. Mercury is in the 1st. And it says that these group associations in her painting, her life in the art world, would be as an essential component of her selfhood. And of course, she was a famous artist. That's what her life's purpose was. So this is when the chart really pops, when we can layer in not only the planet in the sign, the ruling planet, or the planet then in the house, and then where the ruling planet is, and then start telling that story. And so yeah, that would be for another talk. I just wanted to give you a hint of how I would really work with this stuff in its full flowering in a natal analysis. Okay. All right. And so what I'm going to do now is just, I guess, close. I think that's enough of an introduction. I hope this was useful to you. And I just want to point out here, Stormie Grace's YouTube Academy, there's a website. If you just go to stormiegrace.com/YouTube-Academy. And on that website, you've got study resources and recommended reading. Click that because there's going to be some great book recommendations. I know there is, and there's a whole body of resources on Stormie's site for this academy. You know, if it was me and I was just learning astrology, I would just go through the videos, take notes, and build my astrological, vocabulary and get, stretch my astrological muscles. This is a free resource, so take advantage of it. Any new students out there, there's a whole lot here for you. And then of course you can always go to my website, sjanderson144.com. There I offer readings. You can click there to schedule a reading right at top. And then I do weekly videos where I talk about the astrological weather as it unfolds. My favorite thing probably is to understand the energies that we're ensconced in from week to week. Find it very, very useful. And you can always just click there to contact me. You got any questions, message me and ask the questions. I love to help people, and I love to get students in particular. I'll give you suggestions, I'll answer questions, as much as I can to guide you on your journey. So, this is one family of astrologers. We're a big family and we're here to help. So that is where I'm going to end this. Again, Stormie Grace YouTube Academy. This has been S.J. Anderson on Uranus and Neptune through the signs. Take care out there, and I'll talk to you soon.